Hi, students. I am inserting this fun bonus interview for you all with what I would say is an advising expert. And Chris Wardak from TIAA is here to tell you more about what that means and more about what he does. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to tell you a little bit about himself.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Where do I start with my life and career? Gosh, I'll start with the easy part. You know, I was a go-getter and a hard worker, and I could actually give you an example because I went to school full-time and worked full-time through college. So I started my career off in accounting. I started off with a small mom and pop x-ray company where I grew myself from an accounts payable clerk to an assistant controller while going to school for my degree in accounting and finance. When I did attain my degree, I got a bachelor's in accounting and finance. And from there, I went into public accounting. I did public accounting for about 3 years. And I will be totally honest, it was some of the most boringest things I could have done. And when I was in my 3rd year as a senior associate, and I realized trying to figure out what the next tick mark was going to look like was when I realized I needed to do something different.
Yeah.
You know,
your creative brain out there. Is that what you were doing?
Yeah. So after my check mark with 3 lines and a circle with 4 lines, when they started getting a little bit to abyss, I was like, I need to do something more.
Yeah.
And ironically, while I was working for it was a mid-sized firm in New York City called, back then it was called Paneth, Haber and Zimmerman. I think they're now merged a few times and they're called Marks, Paneth and Schroen today, and they're a national firm. In the summertime, as you know, in the audit world, things get quiet. And because I was a younger person and technology was just becoming the in thing, and in my previous job, when I was an assistant controller, I was also an IT administrator for our system for 32 users. When they found that out, they said, "Oh, Chris, you could help our clients on the summers and the times down and become a technology expert." So I actually helped a lot of my smaller clients go from manual ledgers, which we did back then, to systems, which QuickBooks was one of the first big systems to come out for the smaller companies. So I was helping do what we call today, you know, a transformation program, but at a very smaller scale compared to the ones I'll talk about a little bit later in my advisory career. Did that for a few years and then found out that there was this thing called IT audit in the big accounting firms. And I went to Deloitte & Touche, and during my tenure there for 2.5 years, they went from Deloitte & Touche to DT to Deloitte. Yep. Left there about 3 years of doing IT audits and went into KPMG, and KPMG I moved into their advisory practice. And that was when the big ERPs were just becoming popular back then. And the big ones back then were SAP, Oracle, PeopleSoft. And I was very heavily involved in auditing SAP back then. And if any of you know what the large ERP packages look like today from an audit perspective, IT integration into a financial statement audit is very, very important today. And auditing technology and auditing the systems is very important to ensure that the financial data is complete and accurate. So I did that for a few years, and I made partner at KPMG in 2005 and moved into the management consulting area. And I got heavily involved in global systems implementation of SAP and did that for about 7 years. And then in somewhere around 2010, 2011, data analytics were becoming the big things for technology. And they're like, "Hey, Chris, would you help us build out a national data analytics group specifically within the SAP practice?" So I did that for several years. And in 2016, I left and went to PwC. They pulled me in over a year of entertaining me through meetings and wanting me to build out their national week. They called EPM practice, which stood for, or still stands for today, Enterprise Performance Management. And those were a lot of the financial consolidation systems. And I did that for 2 years. And then in 2018, as some of you may be aware, we got some new accounting standards out there, and we had the ASC 642, and which was the new revenue recognition standard, and we had the new leasing standard 845. And I was helping clients implement systems to meet the needs of those new accounting standards. I had done 23 years in the big 4 firms, and I decided to leave. It was I felt like I did my time. I did what I had to do. I've learned everything I possibly could. I took my whole life, and my brother and I moved from New York and moved to Colorado. I took several years off to to re-get my thoughts together, what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go next. And I realized how much I loved being in consulting and advisory. And I continued down that path. And I now work at TIA, and TIA at the time was just kicking off. This was about 8 months ago. Its own internal advisory practice within the internal audit services group. So they brought me on board to help with their practice and building it out and building out internal advisory services to the company itself. And that's where I am today. And just in between, along that line, I should probably mention is when I made partner in 2007, one of our high-ranking partners in KPMG was on the board at St. John's University and had asked me if I'd get involved in becoming an adjunct professor. So during my tenure with KPMG and PwC, I was also an adjunct professor for St. John's University for 8 years. And I taught IT audit to all the auditors and tax people. And then if you may all know about the financial crisis that happened in 2001 and 2, when we had a few of the big major companies like WorldCom and Enron fold because of some accounting problems, and Accenture had gone down. Well, not Accenture, but Arthur Andersen, who became Accenture, they fell down too. So Sarbanes-Oxley came out, and St. John's asked me if I'd be interested in building out a class around teaching students Sarbanes-Oxley and what it really means to an audit as well, and how technology is so integral into the financial statement audit. So I built a syllabus and taught that for about 4 years as well. And they called that Accounting Information Systems and Controls within St. John's School of Business in the Finance and Accounting Department.
Excellent. Well, so what I'm hearing, Chris, after all of this is you might be a better person to teach a couple sections of this class than I am. My goodness, what a background, and especially the IT world and all the implementation. I mean, seeing both sides of it, right? Helping the implementation, and then also obviously teaching people how to audit those systems. I've always said some of the hardest audits that I've ever done are like SAP user access review.
Oh my gosh.
You know, it's just like, but wow, what a background. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, we might have to have you come back and talk about something else.
I could talk for hours on any
topic. Well, today we're going to focus on advising. We have, like I mentioned, we've mostly been talking about assurance and audit in this course. So I want you to talk about what specifically have you guys built out there at TIAA? What does advising mean to you that's different than kind of the other side, what the other auditors do? Can you tell us a little bit more there?
Sure. So as I mentioned, TIA, the advisory practice within TIA that sits in their internal advisory services group is pretty new. Yeah. So it's I know advisory from I'm going to call it the external perspective. So being somebody that was a client relationship partner and client relationship advisor from externally to clients, and now it's my clients are internal. So it's going to be it's working within the company, having clients, but we both work for the same company now. So for me, it's a little bit of a mindset change, right? Because I have to learn now to understand my client that I'm working with and helping support is also looking at the same things I need to. We're both going for the same set of benefits, and that is, how do we help our company become better? Yeah. Whereas when I was with KPMG and PwC, it was like, how do I make my client better? I'm already there. So if I had to say, what's the difference between internal audit versus advisory? Internal audit, I would say, is somebody that is a group that looks at things in the past and evaluates how well they did from the past. Whereas advisory is looking forward and saying, hey, we don't want to know about, we only want to know about your past, but how can we take the problems and the learning lessons from the past and make you better going forward? How do we re-engineer a process? How do we look at what the possible risk exposure is down the line as you transform a specific technology, as you transform a specific part of your organization or your business? And what are those risks? What are those threats? And then what could we do to help make sure that we mitigate those risks, help meet the objectives? So it's definitely a forward-looking way. And in my world, I look at advisory as almost, and I know this may come crazy, but I always look into it as a medical field, right? Because in the medical field, you don't want to always just evaluate a client from here's your problem, how do we fix it? It's, hey, let's keep you healthy, and how do we continue to keep you healthy? Yeah. And that is the same way I look at the company is,
Yeah.
hey, we're healthy, but how do I continue to keep this company healthy and become stronger and better?
Yeah,
So that's the
I
way I
love
kind of
that.
look at advisory.
Yeah, I love that. It's like, it's the proactive versus the reactive, right? I mean,
Correct.
I know that's probably an overused phrase now, but I think the best internal audit functions out there do both and are able to do both
Exactly.
sides. But I do like it that you guys have kind of broken that out, recognizing that it takes different skill sets, a different mindset than maybe your traditional, like you said, looking behind auditing. So
Correct. Yeah,
yeah.
and part of the thing you got to think about is sometimes from an internal audit perspective or even an external audit perspective, you always think about just testing, test.
Yeah.
And your mindset has to be about, okay, we're not testing any longer. We're going to advise. So
Yeah.
we ask questions not about how do we get you, we ask questions on how could we help you. So
Yes.
we look at questions moving forward then rather than looking at questions, what did we used to do?
Yeah, I like that.
So it's a different set of mindsets in the way you ask your questions as well.
Right.
And that's the one thing, even when I got out of audit into advisory, I loved it so much better because I felt like this adds more value to a company sometimes. And don't get me wrong, internal audit has an amazing set of values it adds and it needs it. I work at TIA, and as you know, it's part of the financial services industry. And within TIA, we've got what we call 3 levels of defense, right? You've got your first line of defense, your second line of defense, and then internal audit sits in what they call the 3rd line of defense. So there's lots of different defense lines, and then you've got advisory, which is sitting in 3rd line. But the great thing is we work very closely with first line of defense and second line of defense. So we aren't just about being a 3rd line defense. We're crossing the 3 lines and helping mesh them together, making sure that the client all 3 lines of servicing are focused on all the right objectives together.
Yeah, I love that. Well, you kind of jumped ahead to my next question, which was,
I'm sorry.
no, it's good. What do you see as the real, additional value brought by advising? So you probably really covered that, but anything else, any other thoughts on that?
There's a lot more, yeah.
He's like, I've got a lot of thoughts.
You have to look at it this way too, right? So first lines and second lines sometimes look at some of the status quo stuff, whereas advisory is always looking at what's coming up and what's new that the company's doing. So if you look at what we're doing at TIA, it's a lot of transformative type programs or projects that are happening. And we're in there in each of those different transformation programs and helping them make sure that not only is that program successful, but is the program successful to TIA as a whole? Mm-hmm. So it's a much broader perspective in looking at it all.
Well, it's not to interrupt, sorry again, but to me, what I hear you say is it's like they only have time sometimes to do their job, right? And their piece. So you can come in and kind of get that, take that even a step further than they have time to do even, right? The first line. So,
And the other great part about being in the advisory role that I also love is, as much as I know, when you look at internal audit, you look at the first line, second line defense, they have to go through continuing education to keep up on the things they need to know within their job. The one thing I love about advisory is we're in so many different aspects of the business that I feel like we've got to continue to learn a lot of different things, right? Technology is evolving as quickly as as we're speaking today. By tomorrow, there's gonna be a new technology out. So the great thing about being in advisory as well is that we need to be ahead of the game. We need to be smarter than our clients sometimes, and maybe not smarter, but we need to be more educated, and we need to at least be on par with them so that we can speak with them and make sure that we're speaking at the right level as they need to be taught at. And that is something, in advisory that I'm going to say is one of the things that I love doing is you sometimes have to break down the jargon. So if you're talking technology, you have to look at the business side of the house, you have to look at the technology side of the house. And sometimes technology has so many acronyms and so much jargon that is so specific. How do you translate that to the client and letting them understand it in what I'm going to call a layman's term? Yeah. And that's the other great thing about being in advisory is that you've got to learn how to mesh the 2 different mindsets as well, and helping them think the same way and being on the same playing ground and being able to speak to each other.
Yeah, I've always said, and I might have said this actually on a previous video for the students, but I've always seen internal audit even and advisory even more so as this connector, right? Because sometimes we do see different departments and we can see when someone's doing something well and someone's maybe not doing something well and connect those dots and say, hey, I think they should be doing it like that, right? And so I think that's the great thing is how much within an organization you get to see. Yeah. And, go ahead.
And the great thing about being a part of the internal audit practice is one of the things we could do too is that, hey, listen, we're very close to our brethrens in the internal audit practice, and one of the things they do is they come back to their client or our client that's the same one and say, hey, we did an audit. Here are your problems you need to fix because we have some findings. I come in with it and say, hey, let me help you fix those problems you've got now.
Yeah.
Right. So it's great. So we could be an organization that find the problems and also help our clients rectify and correct and fix them.
Yeah,
So,
that's one of my favorite things to say too. Don't just be in the find the problem business, be in the,
right?
solve the problem business.
It's almost like a radiologist and a looking at the
True.
surgeon. The
Yeah.
radiologist finds the problems and the surgeon fixes them. So
Yeah.
I said, I use medical because I think in my previous life somewhere I wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah. That's great.
So I always use the medical field as a way of making up analogies for me so that I can make it feel like I'm actually being helpful.
Yeah, no, I think it is helpful to think of it in ways like that. And I think for me, it's students, I want to remind you that the definition of internal auditing does include, being an independent, objective assurance and consulting activity.
Yes.
There to add value, right? And
Yep.
improve the organization's objectives. And so while it's very separated at TIAA, I think a good function does do both, maybe even inherently within their audits. Hopefully, they're following through with that advising piece of it, which
Exactly.
fingers crossed, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I will tell you, in a lot of the projects we're in, internal audit and us in advisory are going to the client together. We're not separate. We're going in there so that one thing is we can talk to our client with two separate voices all at one time, so we don't waste their time, right?
Yes.
If we need a half hour of their time from internal audit, we need a half hour from advisory. If we talk together for that half hour, we've given the client back 30 minutes of their time as well. So we're also looking at how do we make our roles jointly more effective to our end clients as well.
Yeah, well, and as you were talking about creating that class around SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley, and
Yes.
creating controls, I know one of the things when I was internal audit director, we started testing our SOX controls within our audit projects, right? To try to, again, it's all about not wasting their time, being efficient, and I think some of what Kate showed us earlier that you guys do as well. So,
and it's also why I said, like I mentioned earlier, in our world, we have first and second line defenses. I'm working with them so that, again, when we go back to the client, we're going as one voice rather than going as three separate voices and not taking up as much time and consuming as much time as we need to.
That's great. Well, I'd say, let's leave this with, I've got two questions really. One is, what would you want the students to know about advisory, whether it's a skill that they might need to build if they're interested in it, or anything else you want to share about what you're doing now? Is there anything else there?
There's lots. I will say this. I think if you're an internal audit or if you're an advisor, one of the things you have to learn to be is a people person. You need to be considerate of of people. You need to be understanding of the client and be aware of their not only their time, but also how you speak with them. So I think the way you connect with somebody. So if I had to say, what are some important things, people skills in terms of how you communicate, when you communicate, understanding a client's body language. One of the things I have found during the pandemic is being in a room with a client versus being in a Zoom. Sometimes you can't pick up small little body language notes. And it's been interesting to learn how do you pick up some of these different languages through a video chat rather than in person. Looking at a client from eye to eye, it makes huge changes. And just like anything, so the better you connect with the client, the more they're going to give you information, because either advisory or internal audit, getting information from the client is what's key for us to understand and know, because we can't help any client unless we have full facts and full understanding. So I would say communication is definitely important, and not only communication verbally, but written communication. I will tell you this, my family and my son, who's 23 and goes to CU Denver here, I teach him this all the time. Use your words based on their definitions. And he'll say something to me like, sure. And I'm just like, is that a yes? Is that a no? He goes, sure. Well, I'm like, sure is like, maybe, okay, I don't know. I'm like, Ryan, if you want to say it, just say yes, Dad, I'm going to do it with you. So even in advisory, I'd say it's very important to be very meticulous and particular with all the words you use to your client, because they're going to read them and they're going to infer a specific set of meanings behind them.
Mm.
So not only communication verbally, like I said, written communications become very, very important. And another thing I think you need to, I've learned to do is stay away from all-inclusive words, right? So ensure, all, every.
Yeah.
I never try to use those words because even in life, one thing I've learned to say never will happen is probably not an accurate statement to make.
Right. Right. Like
So,
the pandemic, right? Never gonna,
yes,
like that will never happen. Oh.
oh my gosh, everybody said we'd never have a pandemic in our lives. Never gonna happen. Never gonna happen.
Yeah.
You know, and gosh, we've lived through a pandemic, and now what do I think to myself? When's the next one gonna happen? Not
I
never
know.
is it gonna happen again.
Yeah.
So yeah, so those are some of the things. Another thing I would say is sometimes be careful with writing emails. I think sometimes picking up the phone or doing a Zoom chat with somebody will go a lot longer, especially in connecting with your end client. So be careful with how much you do in emails as well, because many people, written communication, and myself including, I promise you this, if somebody writes me an email that's four paragraphs long, I read the first 3 sentences and the last 3 sentences and kind of forget about the middle. And I don't do that on purpose. It's part of my nature.
Yeah.
So keep email succinct, simple. And if you need to get into detail, I make a phone call or I set up a meeting on a calendar and set up just 15 minutes, all you need. You know, an email can take 6 minutes to write, but sometimes talking to somebody for 15 minutes just goes a lot more in terms of connection.
Yeah,
So
I love that. One of my favorite things to say is if you can do it, don't put it on your to-do list, right? I mean, just do it.
Again,
it takes more time to put it on your list.
my son does that through, I mean, I look at the Gen Zs today, right? All they do is text message. Everything's texting. And my son will text me and I'll, you know what? And I call him. I said, okay, let's get this through now. Right? Because the texting, you lose something in translation. Right. It just happens. There's, you know, you can put so many words together in such a fast enough time and to be able to get it out to that person.
Well, you've already provided so much advice for the students, but this is my last question. If you had to tell, or you could tell younger Chris something, some piece of advice other than this professional, you know, communication and the things we've been talking about, is there anything else you would share with the students?
Yeah, 2 things. One is it's a personal thing for me. Take care of yourselves. I don't think anybody professionally can help anybody unless they take care of themselves first. And I tell this to my son, even as a parent, right? How do I help make my son a better person if I don't make myself a better person first? So if you're anything, take care of yourself, eat the right foods, you know, work out, do some running, try to find something that keeps your brain stimulated in a way that's not always about just business and technical understanding. I think it's important to separate the times. And I'll tell you, that is something I wish I can go back now when I was working at Deloitte and I was working at Panath Haber & Zimmerman, that I had done that. Instead, I put my head down and I worked from 8 a.m. till 11 p.m. And I think a lot of great things about today is that we've done so much studies in the science area of health and nutrition that we've learned that we don't add value when we've got so many hours of work going on. So definitely take care of yourselves. I think that's important. And the other one is, if I was back in college, I would definitely take classes that are either in the area of, I just say easy, philosophy. I never realized how philosophy was so important to everyday life, especially in the business world. My brother got it, and I say this because my brother got his degree in philosophy, and I'm an older brother, and I'd be like, why are you getting that? It's going to be the most useless degree in your life. And he goes and gets this degree, and we have all these philosophical conversations now, and I'm just like, I get it now. So if there's anything I could tell you to do, it will help you understand yourself better, and will help you understand your clients better, to be philosophical to some degree.
Yeah, I love that.
I would have to say those, and again, if you think about philosophy, it's about mental health is what it does do. So everything about being mentally healthy, it's very important, and it's key to your success, both professionally and personally.
That's great. I love it. Thank you. Great advice. I think internal auditors and maybe advisors as well, we're kind of organizational psychologists in a way. So what you're saying, you know, is we gotta be our own psychologists first, and then we can help our organization.
It's true. And so it's funny you say that. So what I didn't mention in my degree is I've got a minor in sociology.
Okay.
And I will say this, I sit in my first sociology class, And the first question the teacher asked is, she asks every student, I'd like you to give me your reason for why you're in this class. And when she got to me, I'm like, it's because auditors are known to be very boring. And I didn't want to be boring. And I figured if I took sociology, it would help teach me to be less boring.
Yeah.
And she was like, wow. So yes, so
about what it taught you about people, right? That you're auditing.
exactly my point. So it helped me teach me about people so that I learned how to interact with somebody without having to be asking you, all these questions, deep diving into questions without understanding the persona of the person as well and getting to know them personally. So sociology helped me a lot from that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And I can tell you you're a genuine person just from talking with you on here. And thank you for sharing your abundance of knowledge and wisdom with these students.
You are so welcome, Amanda. This was wonderful. I'm sorry, do you go by Joe or Amanda?
I go by Joe. So that's call me Professor Joe. So
Professor Joe, I love it. Yep. All right. Same thing here. Yeah. I never liked being called Professor Wardak. I didn't like it.
I know, it's too formal or something.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Look forward to doing this again someday. Cheers.